Welcome to this video where I will be presenting my photos for September 2021. So as for the video last month, this is based on a slideshow I did for the French channel of the zand.photography YouTube channel. So if you speak French, you might enjoy better the French speaking version. But as I'm going to rant a little bit differently, I'm just going to improvise a little bit. You might not have the same content, so hopefully you'll enjoy both. But if you speak French, you know there's another channel with the French speaking videos. So let's start. So basically, first picture, that's a picture from the San Francisco Bay, actually taken from Sausalito. Here I'm using an Hasselblad Expand large format 35mm camera. It's basically 35mm film in a camera which has the width of a medium format camera. Here I'm using Kono Monolit 64 film, which is a German film. And in that case, the picture is inversed horizontally. We see at the horizon, we see San Francisco. The city should be on the right and the Bay Bridge on the left. Anyhow, here one thing to note is I kind of like working with film, but I'm not very. Sometimes I don't really look at the settings, and here the settings are not really okay. So you have this weird rendering, but I actually like it. Kind of a fog. The next picture is the same thing, and the exposure is not perfect, and the film was definitely covered with dust. So yeah, that gives it an eerie look, which I kind of like. To note, this film has some really interesting gray renderings. Really enjoy the grain on those two next pictures, which I took with the same camera equipment, same Hasselblad Expand. That was in Point Reyes Station, which is a small village north of San Francisco. Here we don't have the dust. The exposure is good. You see that really nice, precise, soft rendering of the film. The grain is really, it's a really fine grain, but overall the overall rendering of the grayscales is great. One thing I like to do is I like to really work with portrait. So when I have such a camera which has such a wide surface, I like working with the panoramic view vertically, which gives it a really different feel. The story is not the same. It sort of focuses the viewer's sight towards what you want to show. Those two pictures give a completely different look to the same village, Point Reyes village, Point Reyes station. On the right, another format that's again portrait, but that's with one of the small Olympus Xa cameras from the 1980s. It's a small rangefinder. Actually, the Hasselblad Expand is a rangefinder too. Those small Olympus Xa cameras are great because they're tiny, they're easy to find, great optics. In this case, it's a 35mm f2.8, which has a really good geometry, a really good rendering in general, a very good resistance to flare. And here I'm using a Silbersalz U200 film, which is, I believe, a Russian film from St. Petersburg, which has a bit more, a little bit more punchy, and the grain is more explicit than on the Monolit 64. But interestingly, with those small cameras, that's something I do. Is I have a few of them, and I put different films. And every time I travel somewhere, I take one of those, but I just take a few shots, and so the film sort of adds different places on the same roll, and then I discover really different places on the same contact sheet. In this case, the first picture was in San Francisco, and now those two pictures, the one on the left is in Arles. It's a village, a small city south of France, where one of the greatest photo festival, the Arles Rencontre de la Photographie, are. And I took those pictures, urban pictures. The right picture is again San Francisco. I would recommend you having a few small cameras with a fixed lens, pocketable cameras to travel around with, and rediscover when you develop the film, rediscover your travels and the small anecdotes, visible anecdotes, travel experiences. The next two photos, the one on the right is again with this Olympus Xa camera, which is a small, really tiny rangefinder, very precise, actually pretty easy to focus with, on which you choose the aperture of your lens, and it automatically will define the exposure time. It's really precise, really hard to mess up technically a shot. And here, this picture on the right, again, with this Silberra U200, it's a 200 ISO film. It's in Geneva, and just for the anecdote, those buildings on the left, far left, used to be home for Edward Snowden, the famous Edward Snowden, when he was working for American intelligence in Geneva. Just an anecdote, nothing to do with the picture. The left picture is a digital. It's using a Leica M6 interchangeable lens rangefinder from 2006. So it's the first Leica M format camera, which doesn't have a full frame sensor, and it's a CCD sensor. I love that camera. I think it's got a really interesting color rendering. And that's one of my favorite combinations. It's with 21mm f4 super Angulon lens from 1958 to 1963. And that, to me, is really the kind of image rendering this setup offers when using it. It's something which I find difficult to recreate with more modern equipment. Here, two different setups. The left picture is film. It's a Silbersalz 500T film, which is basically this German company using Vision 3 film inserted in 35mm cartridges. I've talked about it last month, and do I have? No, I don't have. I'm going to do a video specifically on Vision film. It's a movie film which has a very special halation layer as a background layer, which makes it more rigid and changes the rendering in high contrast. And so it doesn't use C41 developing process, but ECN2. I'm not going to go into the details, but that picture, this really cine look, is because of this film, which Silbersalz actually develops for user in Germany, and it's a photo made with the Leica M6, probably a Sumicron 50mm f2 lens, and it's a library at Luma Foundation in Arles, which is a huge building devoted to photography, which was built by Frank Gehry, if I'm not wrong. On the right, it's a photo taken with this tiny interchangeable lens camera, which is named Pentax Q. It's a Pentax Q system, and here it's the Pentax QS1 model, which was the last body they made, which is really a great body. It's really tiny, even with this zoom lens, which is a 69 to 207mm f2.8 equivalent. It really holds in a jacket pocket. So great camera if you like being discreet and not carrying a lot of gear with you. All of the lenses they propose for the system are quite interesting, pretty high standard. It's a 12 megapixel sensor. It's pretty old, but it's really a very interesting system, which I do love. And that's the Rhone River and the same building I was talking about before that we saw in the black and white photo where Snowden used to live. The next two photo, we're going back to the Leica M8 CCD camera, the same as I used for the mountain photos. The mountains, by the way, were in the Gruyère region, where they make the Gruyère cheese in Switzerland. It's central Switzerland. And here it's in Paris. Those two pictures are in Paris. The first photo on the left, it's just after the rain, on front of the European House of Photography. And again, Leica M8 camera was a 21mm f4 super Angulon lens. The right picture, it was basically just before, in one of those small streets of Paris where it was really raining strongly. One thing interesting is it's not a very sensitive sensor on the Leica M8, and this kind of cyanish look on the bottom of the picture, the grain is typical of underexposed Leica M8 sensors. The sensor is a CCD from Kodak at the time, which was really top of the line, but same thing here. Leica M8, same lens, both pictures, better exposure on both. Again, Paris on the left, and on the right, it's probably going to Paris using one of those high-speed trains, TGV. Next picture. Here it's using the Hasselblad Expand camera again, and using a film which is the Silbersalz 500T, also the same film I used for the library at the Luma Foundation in a Swiss forest in the state of Vaud. What was interesting was the Hasselblad Expand. It was a collaboration between Hasselblad and Fuji. So you actually have the Hasselblad Expand, the Hasselblad XPan2. It's sort of the same model, but you can change the film format. You can decide to go back to 3:2 format ratio or panoramic on the second version. And Fuji had the same equivalent camera, which was named TX1 and TX2. Yeah, just an anecdote. So I really like the rendering of those cameras and combined to this kind of film. Same thing, same setup. Very organic looks of those of the greens. Everything goes towards warm colors because it's a film that's basically meant to be for indoor lightings. But you can use them as you want. Depends what you want to say and what you want to render. So if you know what you're using, or even if you experiment and just try it out. And the next photos here, going back to Leica M8. That's the wine country in the Vaud state of Switzerland. They actually have this school of wine. So that was it's a few pictures I took when I was going there. The picture on the left, it's basically one of those wines they're experimenting with. And on the right, if you look on the mountain, there's an observatory. It's a Dole observatory on the Jura Mountains in Switzerland. So basically that's September, no snow, really nice wine country. Same place. The school of wine is named École de Changin. It's a high school of viticulture. And interesting, the picture on the right is always a super Angulon lens I was talking about before. That's a kind of rendering you get when the sensor is saturated by the sun, and the lens flare you get is actually pretty nice, in my opinion. And that's the last photo for this month. So hopefully it was enjoyable, and if you have questions or comments or suggestions, don't hesitate to post them underneath this video. And see you next time.